We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Tonight on Farage, ahead of a big grilling tomorrow before a parliamentary committee, we'll ask the question, do you believe Boris when he says he did not mislead Parliament? We'll have a look at the Casey report that says the Met Police is institutionally racist and homophobic. Is that right, or is it simply a council of despair? Ambassador John Bolton will join me. We will talk about the summit between China and Russia, which I think should be the biggest news story of the day. And joining me on Talking Pints, Luther Blissett, who was a sensation, England and Watford footballer a few years ago. We'll ask him, is football better today than it was then? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. A damning report into Britain's largest police force has been described by the Home Secretary today as very concerning. Baroness Louise Casey, who led the review, found the Met Police to be institutionally racist, misogynist and homophobic. The report also found the Met's current ethics standards and disciplinary procedures have failed abysmally, and she's calling for a complete overhaul of the service. Suella Braverman says she has every faith that the Commissioner of Police, Sir Mark Rowley, will be a catalyst for change. And she's vowed to hold officers and the Mayor of London to account.
There have been growing concerns around the performance of the Metropolitan Police and its ability to command the confidence and trust of Londoners. This follows a series of abhorrent cases of officers who betrayed the public's trust and hideously abused their powers. Today's report, commissioned by Sir Mark's predecessor, makes for very concerning reading. It's clear that there have been serious failures of culture, leadership and standards.
Now, Boris Johnson has accepted he misled Parliament over Partygate, but he maintains it wasn't intentional or reckless. Submitting his 52-page defence dossier to the Privileges Committee, the former Prime Minister admitted gatherings at Downing Street during lockdown should never have happened. He also said statements in the House of Commons were made in good faith. He's due to give more evidence in person before MPs tomorrow. Counter-terrorism police are investigating an attack outside a mosque in Birmingham. And a warning for television viewers, we're about to show video of the moment a man was set alight, which some may find distressing. It's shown on CCTV footage. The victim was walking home and then was approached yesterday, and he was sprayed with an unknown substance. West Midlands police say he suffered serious injuries, including burns to his face, but they're not thought to be life-threatening. A man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. And a man's been charged for sending an inappropriate message to Labour's deputy leader. Angela Rayner received an email said to have been grossly offensive and indecent in May last year. 66-year-old David Perry has been charged under the Communications Act. He'll appear before Westminster Magistrates Court next month. Now, a group of Eurosceptic Conservative MPs has described parts of the Prime Minister's new Brexit deal with the EU as practically useless. The European Research Group commissioned lawyers to scrutinise the Windsor framework ahead of tomorrow's vote on the Stormont break element of the proposal. A spokesperson for Rishi Sunak said it is a good deal and is urging lawmakers to back it. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Time for Farage.
Well, I guess the biggest domestic story in British politics today is the dossier released by Boris Johnson. It was given yesterday to a committee that will grill him tomorrow afternoon for 4 hours and has now gone public today. And the big debate is, did Boris Johnson mislead Parliament? Because if the committee tomorrow finds that he did and Parliament agrees with them, and if he faces a suspension of more than 10 days from the Commons, there will virtually automatically, through a process called recall, be a by-election in Uxbridge that, frankly, he would lose. So Boris Johnson's political career is on the line. That is no exaggeration. But on the issue over parties that took place in Downing Street, or should I say repeated parties that took place in Downing Street whilst the rest of us were locked down, there is this big question of, did he mislead Parliament? But more importantly, did he intentionally mislead Parliament? Let's have a look at Boris being questioned on this just over a year ago.
Could I ask the Prime Minister, did you deliberately mislead the House at the dispatch box?
No, Mr. Speaker.
But for MPs who are discussing your probity this afternoon in the House of Commons, who are saying that you did mislead them with all the statements you made as these revelations came out, what do you say to them? And the answer to that straight question, did you mislead the House of Commons knowingly or inadvertently?
Well, of course not. But it's up to them. They must do whatever they want. That's their prerogative. I want to focus on the...
I may not be the world's leading expert. I may well not be the world's leading expert on body language, but I have to say that second interview, done just a few days after he definitively said no to the House of Commons, looked, how can I put it, pretty shifty. But ahead of this committee meeting that will take place, this 4-hour grilling tomorrow afternoon, Boris Johnson has put out, I think, a very key statement today. He accepts that he did mislead Parliament. I accept that the House of Commons was misled by my statements, that the rules and guidance had been completely followed at number 10. So what he's saying is, I did mislead Parliament, but it wasn't my fault, Gov, because people at number 10 told me that actually everything we were doing was within the rules. So my question to you is, do you believe Boris? Give me your views, Farage at gbnews.uk. I have to say this, and a lot of you watching this and listening to this will not like this one little bit, because I know many of you are big fans of Boris Johnson. But I've spoken to people who were at school with him, who worked with him on the Telegraph and the Times, and everyone says the same thing. He is engaging, he is entertaining, he has his passions, but his relationship with the truth is pretty loose. Whether this is going to be the end of Boris Johnson's career or not, I simply can't say. But I have to say that I struggle very much to believe that he's ever telling the truth. In fact, I'm not even sure he knows whether he's telling the truth. Well, somebody who knows him very, very well is Alex Crowley. And Alex, I mean, you've been with him as Mayor of London, his leadership campaign. You've worked with this guy for many, many years. And I'm sure you'd agree with me. He's engaging, he's entertaining, he's all of those things. But when you look at the record, you know, sacked by the Times newspaper for publishing a story that was just wholly untrue. Sacked from the Conservative opposition front bench for a denial of a relationship. Now, you know, he may have been protecting people I don't know, that was just untrue. Alex, whatever we think of him, whether we like him or dislike him, is irrelevant here, because he is quite jolly. And
yep.
Do you find him truthful in all the years you've worked with him? Do you find him a truthful man?
I think he passionately believes what he says at the time, even if they are perhaps inconsistent with previous statements.
That's not exactly. That is not exactly.
If I was to put that delicately,
that is not exactly a ringing endorsement of the veracity of what Boris Johnson has to say.
You've read out the record. Obviously, I think anyone sane and logical couldn't possibly disagree with that summary of events. What people like about him is the slightly chaotic nature of him. And that's the positive side of him. But I think we all have to accept that there are some downsides that come with that. And this is perhaps one of them. He bounces from thing to thing and idea to idea. and he gets caught up a little, I think, sometimes. He perhaps likes getting away with things that he perhaps may feel are different.
He's like the naughty sixth former. That's being caught, and you see this sort of grin to camera. Oh gosh, I've been caught again.
Yes, exactly. Think of a sort of 50s comic strip schoolboy kind of character. That is the persona that he's cultivated, and generally speaking, he's perhaps got more positive things out of it than negative, and I think we just have to accept that that is the person Boris is.
But here's the problem. Never before in our history, certainly not since Cromwell and the Puritans, not even in World War II, did we have our liberties and our freedoms taken away from us in the way they were in those successive lockdowns. We weren't allowed to visit our elderly relatives. We weren't allowed to meet socially. Even when we were, it was a rule of 6 or whatever it may be. There were people that received £10,000 fines for social gatherings. And we learn that there was a culture in Downing Street. And by the way, I thought the fixed penalty notice that he got for walking into a room and being given a birthday cake was ludicrous.
Well, we now have a situation where 2 prime ministers have received a fixed penalty notice for being in this, happen to have been in the same room as a birthday cake.
Listen, I absolutely get that. However, what we know is there were suitcases. People were going to supermarkets and filling suitcases with bottles of booze. And on the eve of the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral,
of course,
boozing it up till 2 or 3 in the morning with karaoke machines in number 10 Downing Street. It is literally impossible that the man at the head of government did not know that occurred. Well, literally impossible.
If I'm going to, I will be slightly fair to him and say that those cases that you referred to, which were out of order and disgraceful, and most people accept that, he wasn't actually at those ones.
Alex, I fully accept that.
I will be slightly fair to him.
Argument
However,
I made that he was the head of the organisation.
And I subscribe to the Lord Carrington view. If your name's above the door, then the buck stops with you. End of, right? But I do find it interesting that because we must remember that the schedule of a prime minister is completely ludicrous, right? The Prime Minister has the same number of hours in the day that you and I have. The only problem is they have to do about 100 times more things. Literally what happens is the Prime Minister of the day is shunted from thing to thing, right? And so he will have been walking from one meeting to another. Someone will have come to him with a bit of paper and said, right, now you've got to go in there and say goodbye to that person because they're leaving. So do a quick toast and then go on to your next thing, right?
I get that.
I'm not saying this to excuse him, but I find it very interesting that all of these other things were happening. What were the armies of officials in Number 10 doing exactly? The ones who had to keep the building managed from day to day, who were probably more knowledgeable about the regulations in some respect because they wrote them, right? I find it. What was going on with the civil service here as well?
Alex Crowley, there are lots of people here guilty of one of the great hypocrisies, allowing a culture to take place in Downing Street whilst the rest of us were living in fear for going to visit our elderly relatives. Do you think Boris survives this committee tomorrow afternoon?
I think he survives it in the sense that it's actually sort of irrelevant what the committee decides. It's going to go to a vote of the House. Right? The committee has no power to do anything to it.
No, but what they say is quite important.
What they say is important, but ultimately it comes down to a political question of Conservative MPs, which is this. Do we stick our necks on the line to get rid of this guy, or do we censure him in some lesser way to show that we were all very upset and this really shouldn't have happened, but fundamentally keeping him in the House of Commons? That's what the real question is.
No, that, I think, is a very good analysis. Well, we'll see what happens over the course of the next few days. I have to say, I think to actually prove that yes, he misled Parliament. I've said for the last 18 months that it was obvious that he'd misled Parliament. But to actually prove fairly that he willfully misled Parliament is a very difficult thing. And that's where Alex is right. Ultimately, it'll be Tory MPs that decide his fate. In a minute, Lord Greenhalgh will join me, former Deputy Mayor for Policing in London. Is Dame Louise Casey right when she decries the Met Police as being institutionally racist, homophobic, in fact, virtually every crime you can commit in modern Britain? Is she right? Does the Met need breaking up, or is it simply over the top? Back with you in a couple of minutes.
We
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr.
Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So your reactions to my question, do we believe Boris is telling the truth? I got to tell you, anything to do with Boris Johnson raises huge emotions on both sides. You know, Joe says, yes, I believe Boris. But David says that man has never made a truthful statement in his life. As I say, great passions. Dave says, no politician tells the truth, no matter what side of the house they are on. Dave's a proper skeptic. And another says, no, he lies through his back teeth over and over again. Look, folks, I am not anti-Boris. I quite like him. I think he's quite fun. I've just always said he has a very loose relationship with the truth, and it's very difficult to live with that when you are in the ultimate position of being Prime Minister up at that dispatch box. Let's move the subject on. I'm joined by Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, former Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime under Mayor Boris Johnson. A lot of Boris men in the room today. We've had, Stephen, yet another Louise Casey review. She's been doing this for 20 years, producing these reports. And if we listen to the headlines this morning on our radio and televisions, you know, the Metropolitan Police are institutionally homophobic, racist, transphobic. The thing needs to change immediately or all be broken up. I mean, I don't for a minute doubt there's some very bad eggs in the Met, as there are, frankly, in all walks of life. But I felt the whole thing was a total counsel of despair. But you were fortunate enough to have an embargoed copy of this report. You've had a chance to really understand it. What is she telling us?
Well, she's telling us quite a lot of sensible things, actually. So if you read the recommendations,
They're not headline grabbing. They're sort out the vetting procedures, which no one can disagree with. We don't want to have police officers that are going to abuse their powers. There's also about how you deal with the rotten apples and you can get them out of the system. And that's a problem for successive commissioners, that the whole misconduct process is really difficult. I mean, I remember having meetings around particularly bad cases of corrupt officers and just trying to deal with pension forfeiture years after the event. So I think there are some hugely sensible reforms. They're just very technocratic. There are also some calls for governance reform, which I think really throws into question what the hell has the mayor been doing for the last 7 years. And one of the things is to set up a board, a policing board for London, which we actually had under Boris Johnson. It was called the MOPAC Challenge, a performance review meeting. He's completely dismantled that. He's also got rid of the key metric to determine whether the police are behaving properly with the public, which is public confidence.
Now, here's a very important point. I don't think most people watching and listening to this now understand what the relationship is between the Mayor of London and the Metropolitan Police. Please explain.
Yeah, it's very clear, and it's down to the reform of Nick Herbert, who's now in the Lords with me. He is the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act. Mayor Khan is effectively the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. He has executive oversight to ensure that the Metropolitan Police Service is both effective and efficient. He has budgetary control over the Met. You can set very low key decision limits. He owns the buildings. I mean, this mayor has a huge amount of power and levers over the Metropolitan Police Service, but I don't think he can see a lever. He's done absolutely nothing.
Yeah, when it goes wrong,
he blames everyone else.
But he's nobody to be seen.
He's nobody seen. Yeah,
I haven't heard a single criticism of Mayor Khan today.
Well, I mean, that's what I found extraordinary, that here is a mayor that dismantled the performance framework that we used under Boris to increase public confidence in policing after the riots. If you remember 2011, it really plummeted. We got confidence up to 2/3 of Londoners, which is not great, but it's good enough that 2/3 of Londoners believe they were doing a good job, at least a good job. Now, fewer than 1 in 2 Londoners think the police are doing a good job. Trust has plummeted even further. So there's a real issue, and this man doesn't have the performance metric, he doesn't have the leadership qualities. I think the mayor's got to step up and take the hit.
Regardless whether it's the mayor or successive bosses of the Met, do you believe that the Metropolitan Police are institutionally racist, homophobic and transphobic?
Well, those are the headlines of today, and I frankly agree with the Commissioner, actually, and many of the other former police officers that think it doesn't help. The phrase institutional, what does that actually mean? The real question is, how do you deal with systemic problems? How do we deal with issues that, like improving the vetting procedures, but not using these headlines that actually don't analyse the problem, and they just write a story for you. So I think let's have the clear idea of how the Met is going to reform, and do we believe that the current Commissioner is going to do that reform?
So reform,
and I believe he will,
rather than breaking it up.
Well,
which is what Casey kind of said.
Well, I have some sympathy, if we compare with the other great global city, of the idea of having clear lines of responsibility. If the Met holds national responsibilities, then they nod to the Home Secretary. If you're the police force for London, they nod to the Mayor. So perhaps clarifying those lines of responsibility and creating a national policing entity that is answerable to the Home Secretary and being very clear what the police service is for London. That's not really breaking it up, because the Met will still be a huge number of police officers.
Yeah. I tell you what, there's no easy answers to this, but Stephen, thank you for coming in and joining us. And a quick thought on political correctness, and this is really, really important. Angela Kilmartin, a councillor on Braintree District Council. Now, she's 81, and I think she's entitled to her views. She did not like Braintree High Street being full of pride flags. She said, "I don't want pride sex flags along my high street. I don't even want heterosexual flags along my high street." Do you know what? I actually rather agree with Angela. I can't understand why when I shop at Waitrose at certain times of the year, there's a pride flag on the desk. Do you know what? I don't care. I'm not interested. We should all be equal before the law. We don't need this nonsense. And yet, Michael Lager, the town council Conservative leader, has suspended her. We disassociate ourselves totally from the reported remarks from this particular member. Isn't it time we all just grew up a little bit, accepted there are differences between human beings? Why should anybody have a problem with that? What we don't need, living our normal daily lives, are adverts for various different groups. Either we're all equal before the law, or we are doomed as a society. In a moment, I'll be joined by Ambassador John Bolton. we're going to talk about the biggest story in the world that is being virtually ignored as we play these Westminster and Met Police relative parlour games. The getting together of the Russian and the Chinese presidents. Back with you in 2 minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, as I've said, I think the single most important and potentially worrying development over the course of the last day, and indeed the last couple of weeks, is the increasing global prominence of, yes, the Chinese president, President Xi. There he was just last week, brokering an agreement, almost like an Abraham Accord, between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I could scarcely believe what I was seeing, or the lack of comment around it. And there he is with Putin, and they're praising each other to the high heavens. In fact, it's even been reported that Putin may now go and visit Beijing. We're not talking about this enough. I fear our potential enemies are getting together. I wonder whether our stance over Ukraine is part of that. Well, who better to speak to on an issue of this gravity than Ambassador John Bolton, former US Ambassador to the UN, and of course National Security boss under Donald Trump. John, no one's talking about this big get-together over the last 2 days in Moscow. What does it mean to you?
Well, it's hugely significant. And, you know, sometimes history moves fast, sometimes it moves slow. I think it's moving very fast now. And you've hit two very important things. China's presence in the Middle East in a way it's never done before, followed a few days later by joint naval maneuvers by Russia, China, and Iran in the Gulf of Oman, right outside the Strait of Hormuz, through which all that oil comes. And then in Moscow, you can't make this up. What has been recreated here is the Cold War Sino-Soviet alliance, except this time it's the Chinese who are on top and it's the Russians who are the junior partners. And they've got outliers like Iran and North Korea. This is a global problem. This is not just a European issue, it's not just an Asian issue.
No.
It's a very new development that we're not thinking through.
And South Africa appears to be in that camp now. And the big question is, where does India go?
Yeah. Well, I think India can be brought away from the Russians. It's difficult given their background, but they do see China as their principal enemy, and they share a frontier that the Chinese are constantly encroaching on, so there's reason for that. But India has helped Russia out buying oil and gas during the war in Ukraine, so it's very complicated for them. But what all this says is the kind of comfort level we've had after the end of the Cold War is over. Now, it was in fact over before. For America, 9/11 showed that it was over. But this is really significant. And I just fear in America and in Europe, people don't see the big picture.
I wonder, John Bolton, and I was over at CPAC recently, and as you know, I'm in touch with a lot of media and political figures in the States. I'm fascinated. I mean, here there is very strong support for Zelensky, very strong support for Ukraine. We take the view that a sovereign country has been invaded and therefore we must defend them and help them. I sense amongst conservatives in America there is now a sort of reluctance to keep pouring money and arms into Ukraine. Is the West's, to date, support for Zelensky, is that, in a way, pushing our allies to get our enemies together on the other side? Should we be playing a less proactive role in Ukraine is really the question I'm asking.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is no. I think you've got to resist Russian aggression against Ukraine because the Chinese are looking at this very carefully. And if the United States, the United Kingdom won't resist on the continent of Europe, Beijing may well conclude we won't resist when they go after Taiwan.
And is that what Putin concluded after the catastrophic withdrawal from Kabul?
100%. Both China and Russia saw that as a huge mistake by the United States, totally an unforced error. But I want to come to your point about pushing Russia toward China. This has been going on for quite some time. When I was going to Moscow, when I served in the White House, I said to the Russians, you're moving in the wrong direction. You're getting closer to China. This is going to work out poorly for Russia over an extended period of time. I got no traction at all. I made no converts to that idea. But there's no doubt the difficulty Russia's had in the war in Ukraine has forced them to turn to China, and China's going to take advantage of it. And that's not in our interest.
Yeah. No, we put sanctions on Russia and they find new markets in China. Now, I wonder if Donald Trump had been in the White House, whether Putin would have invaded Ukraine. What do you think?
Well, I think he thought Trump was going to withdraw from NATO in a second term, and I do think that would have been a possibility. Trump has said in the past few days we need to completely reevaluate NATO, which I take to be
Well, Trump said the delinquent members should pay the 2%.
And I tell you, 99% of Americans agree with that.
Yeah.
That too many European countries have benefited from UK and US defense expenditures. But I think Putin was expecting a Trump victory in 2020, and I think that's when he would have gone after Ukraine.
Interesting. Now, John, you and President Trump famously fell out quite dramatically.
That's very diplomatically put, Nigel.
Well, I mean, I think both sides had their fair say. But I've got to come. And goodness knows what on earth is going on when Trump puts out at the weekend on Truth Social, they're going to come and arrest me on Tuesday, and barricades are being put up around the courthouse in New York, and people are massing in the streets outside Mar-a-Lago. This is all around a £130,000 payment that was made to porn star Stormy Daniels, and it's all about whether that should have been listed as a campaign contribution. Well, whether it should or shouldn't, I can't judge. But even if it should and it was omitted, I looked at it. About $1.6 billion was spent between the two sides of the presidential campaign. This, at worst, would be a misdemeanor and a rounding error, wouldn't it?
Yeah, look, Trump faces a number of potential criminal indictments. And I think anybody who's looked at them would say the Stormy Daniels case is the least important, least significant. If one prosecutor were handling all these, this would be the last case brought. But we have a federal system. The Georgia prosecutors are looking at another thing, New York, federal government. There obviously was no coordination.
Because the deep state wants to bring him down. That's what the Trumpites would say.
Well, here's a point that I don't think you can argue with, and that is the Democrats think that Trump is their greatest asset. They may be right or they may be wrong, but the real question here is not whether Trump gets indicted. I think that's coming in days. I don't know exactly when, but it's days, not weeks, in the Stormy Daniels matter. The real issue is, will he get convicted? If he is acquitted, I think that will give Trump the Republican nomination and could elect him to the presidency. If he's convicted, even though it's trivial in the big picture, a former president of the United States convicted for cooking the books for the hush money he paid a porn star with whom he was having an affair.
John Bolton, $130,000, and here we have the president's drug-addled son getting, and his brother's not done too badly either, getting millions from corrupt regimes all over the world. Won't fair-minded Americans say something's gone wrong? Everything's rotten in America, including our judiciary.
Well, I have to say this. In middle America, out where the evangelical Christians are, hush money to a porn star is not a good look.
Not a great sell. I do buy that point, but you know what? Nor were the Bully Bush tapes, and yet they still voted for him in those states.
Once for sure. Will it happen again? I'm wondering.
There's no way John Bolton's ever going to come back on side with Donald Trump, but it's a pleasure to have you back in the studio. It really is, and discuss that really important issue. Quick thought before we go to the break. There I was last night up at RAF Scampton. Have a look at these pictures as I was broadcasting from that extraordinary Dam Busters Inn up in the local village hall. Hundreds of people were gathering. They do not want that iconic RAF site from which that amazing Dam Busters raid was launched. They do not want this turned into a migrant detention centre for young men crossing the English Channel. They want that runway to stay open. They want jobs. They want investment. And I am 100% on their side, as I think should you be. There is a petition to save RAF Scampton, its history, its legacy, its future prospects. And above all, I want future generations to know the amazing sacrifice our grandparents made for us all to be free. If you go to change.org, you can sign the petition yourself. In a minute, I'm going to be joined on Talking Pints by an absolutely groundbreaking black footballer, Luther Blissett, of Watford fame, of England fame. And I tell you what, he's a hell of a guy. Back with you in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's time for Talking Pints. Yes, that time of the day, and I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by Luther Blissett. Luther, welcome.
My pleasure.
To the programme. Now...
And that's gin, by the way.
I don't believe a word of it. He's still fighting fit in every way. Luther, first generation immigrant to Britain.
Yeah.
What was it like when you first came here?
When I arrived, it would have been, 62, 63 when I arrived. And coming from the Caribbean where it's warm, it's sunny and that sort of thing, you run around as a kid, as a 5, 6-year-old, you run around, in bare feet all the time, and you're like maybe a quarter of a mile from the actual Caribbean Sea as well. So it was, for a young boy, it's the most idyllic place ever to be in, to live on an island in the Caribbean. So it was something that I never ever thought at any stage that would be somewhere I'd end up here in England. But it's funny how things go, and I've loved my time in England.
But you grabbed an opportunity in England that you wouldn't probably have got.
No.
In Jamaica. You might have played cricket, who knows?
Well, cricket actually was the main thing that we played. We played cricket on the beach, but anywhere we were playing cricket. I actually broke my left arm playing cricket because I think my brother pushed the baby roller over. It still didn't stop us from playing.
Well, cricket's loss was football's gain. So, you're here, you're obviously a talented sports player, natural ball player. Football is your game. And you're really quite young, aren't you, when you get involved with Watford?
It was, yeah. I was I was 15, probably just turned 14, 15 when I first came to Watford. And it was only through Paul Kitson, who was at my school at Willesden High, and he went to Watford. He signed for Watford as a professional. And it was him coming back to the school, and I think it would have been about August, September time. And you can imagine all of us heard this. So, there's a football in the building, so we've all gone to have a chat with them in the common room. And he said, there's open trials being held at RAF Stanmore. You boys should go along. 9 of us went, and I was the only one that made a career out of it. So it was the right thing for me.
You go to Watford. You spent a lot of years at Watford. There were some big names around.
Well, the biggest name of all, Sir Elton John. Before he became, there was no bigger name really.
And he was complete, and still is.
Yeah,
complete Watford devotee.
Oh yeah, completely. And I remember the first time I actually saw him. We used to train there on at the ground on a Monday evening after school. So you'd come up on the train and you get there and we train. We'd be running around and up and down the terraces. And as we were doing this, in the tunnel, this chap appeared and these huge lapels, these glasses, and we went, "Who's that?" Us from Willesden had no idea who he was. Because we were sort of Bob Marley and all that kind of stuff, and it was nothing to do with that. So it was really good, and that was the first time I actually met Elton John.
He adores the club.
Oh, he does, yeah.
He's always adored the club. He's pumped money into it. He's given it publicity. He finished up, Luther, a massive fan of yours.
Yeah, well, I think
he said you were Watford's favourite son.
He did, and I mean, I was quite taken aback by that. But you know, we used to do things at Watford, such as supporters would sponsor bits of everybody's kit and whatever, and have a good, you had a real sort of presentation dinner at the end of the season, which you'd sit with your sponsors at the table, and his mother was one of my sponsors, Sheila Fairbrother. She was one of my sponsors, and so yeah, we really got to know him and her and the family really well, and we all got on because Watford was a family, and this was all down to Graham Taylor, because Graham Taylor was the one that really lit the blue touch paper when he arrived in '77 at Watford.
I went on to become England manager and other things in later years. But the really interesting part of that journey, Luther, I think, is that you know when you go to Watford, it is in old money.
Yeah,
it's a fourth division
yeah.
side. So you're in the Football League, but you're right down.
But you don't care. You don't care. It's every boy, and now it's every girl's dream, which is brilliant. But you know, at the time we are now, to be a professional footballer, and for me that came true. It started in fourth division. It was never a problem. Fourth division. No, all I wanted to do was to be a professional footballer, and I had that opportunity to do it at Watford. And again, all things fell together really well.
But the journey. Tell us about the journey from the fourth division.
Oh, the journey was incredible. It was signed by Mike Keane. So a year after Mike Keane signed me, or that Mike Keane left, Graham Taylor arrived. And for myself and a lot of the younger players that were hoping to make a name for themselves, it opened the doors. Graham Taylor just wanted young players to come in and show what their worth was. So he gave you that opportunity. And as long as you showed that you were good enough, you know, then
and you go from the fourth division,
which was just amazing. So we won the fourth division. We came second in the third division, and in that third division, one of the big games I remember is beating Manchester United in the League Cup on a Tuesday night up in Manchester. So there was me. I think I was 20 at the time. You know, scoring both goals, and we beat them 2-1. So something really special for myself. But for Watford, it was just amazing to see the rise and the way this club went. You know, fourth, third. We had 3 seasons, then the second, and then got into the first division, which is now the Premier League, which is unheard of. Will we ever see the likes of that again? I doubt it, the way football is now. And finishing second to Liverpool at that time, is just incredible.
You see, the problem is now, isn't it? You know, to go up through the divisions, up through, 1, 2, the Championship and on to the Premier League. To do that, you'd now need a couple of $100 million, wouldn't you?
A bit more than that.
Sorry, OK.
I think we'd need Chelsea money to do that.
But in those days, I mean, clearly there was money in football when you were playing it.
I mean, the money in football, but players would be bought for £20,000 and £30,000 and that sort of thing. You know, my first wages as a professional footballer at the age of 17 was £30 a week, which is an absolute fortune. You know, when you think of that time, of what you could buy with £30. I remember going home, having been paid that first Friday, with £30 in your pocket, plus a signing-on fee, and you're walking down the high street from Willesden Junction to home, and I'm thinking, I can buy that. And it was just wonderful feeling.
Given the number of goals you scored, what would you get paid now?
Oh, goodness me, goals per game as well. I'd say, no, I want a goal bonus. I remember saying that to Graham Taylor. He says, "What? That's what you're in the team to do. So why should I pay you again for that?"
But you're right. That journey from the bottom of the Football League to the very top, it's very difficult to see it being repeated.
It's impossible for it to be done now, because
which is very sad, actually.
It is, because that is the dream. And again, another reason why we all love football the way it was back then was, you as a fourth division, a non-league, you could be playing, as it is now, you could play in Man City at home or away in the FA Cup, because that was all part of it. That is the beauty and the magic of what football was in this country.
And all of it.
Incredible,
And there is magic to that, isn't there?
Oh, totally. We saw Wrexham give it a good try as well, which is amazing.
Now, as Watford, went up through the league, you became an incredibly prominent personality and player in a football world where there weren't not that many black players.
No, there wasn't. There was very few. I mean, I think I counted probably about 5, and I was one of the 5.
Yes.
When I started, you had people like Adi Koki, you had Clyde Best, you had Brendan Batson, Laurie Cunningham, and that was pretty good. And then myself and
for you, the England call.
England call is one of those things you dream about. You have these dreams. I want to play for this club, and I want to play for England. You want to walk out at Wembley, and you want to score at Wembley, and that came true for me, which is just like, absolutely incredible.
Well, it came through in quite a big way, really, because you got a hat-trick on your debut.
And you know, the thing about that, Nigel, as well, is, you know, we're talking about it, you know, the first black player to score for England, and that never crossed my mind. And even when it happened, it never really registered how big a moment that was. Not until many years later, it was actually when I went to school doing some other things, that one of the kids said it, and that's when it really resonated with me after that.
Yeah, well, for those watching on telly, we got some shots of Luther on that big day. And, you know, you played quite a few games for England. You didn't get the chance to score many more goals.
No, I think the thing is, you know, I mean, that's down to me. That's down to me. I don't blame anybody else for it, because you walk out to that football pitch and what you do it to the best of your ability on that day, and certain days it just doesn't happen. And for me, the opportunities were there, but I didn't take them in one or two other games. So it comes to an end a bit abruptly, but, you know, that's life. But you still got your club career. Where
you made it, you did it, and then you did time at AC Milan, and you went around a bit, and then you finish up in the end back at Watford.
I did, on my third stint was there, but in the middle I went to Bournemouth for 3 seasons, and it was fantastic. I mean, I played I think about 120 odd games for Bournemouth and scored 56 goals. So the ratio was decent there as well. And that's the one thing I pride myself on, is that my job as a striker was to score goals. And that's what I attempted to do every time I went on the pitch. And, you know, ended back at Watford after the third spell, and then joining the coaching team with Graham Taylor, getting promotion to the Premier League for the first time at Watford as being part of that management team was, again, you know, a great moment for myself and the club and everybody involved.
And you've done, you know, the last few years you've done charity work.
Yeah.
You've done all sorts of things, and you were recognised last year.
Unbelievable.
I mean, and she's sadly no longer with us.
No.
Her Majesty the Queen.
Yeah. I was awarded an OBE.
You won sort of the last OBEs.
That's right. Yeah, I was in that last honours list that she did before she passed, and I just couldn't believe it when the letter fell on the mat at home, you know, from the Cabinet Office, because obviously the war in Ukraine had started and whatever, and this letter, and I went, I wonder what's in that. I think I'm too old now to join the army or whatever. Now, this, I think it can't be that. And so, yeah, look, and that's what it was, and I was just absolutely blown away by it. It's an incredible honour, and it's something I'm hugely proud of. And, you know, and I've said it when I spoke about it often, OBE meaning, you know, on behalf of everyone, and that's the people that I worked with and helped me achieve the things that I did. So, yeah, it is an amazing honour.
No, it's fantastic. And a final thought, Luther, you know, football today compared to 40 years ago, would you rather play now in the Premier League with all the money you could make?
No.
Or would you rather have played as you did?
I say that when I played, and players like myself, that was, for me, the golden era of what football was about. Yes, you know, certain clubs, you know, they did get paid very well, but it was about the football. And every team had their own identity about the way they went about playing their football, and, you know, and contributed to success or whatever they had. I just find football now that everybody tries to play the game the way Man City plays it. And one thing I learned playing sport or in anything, you never take somebody on at their own game. And too many clubs, I think, try to play football that way when they don't have the players to achieve it. And, you know, it plays in the hands of teams like of Man City and others, because they will always be better than you.
Yeah, don't try and copy the original. It's not going to work.
No, absolutely.
Well, I have to say, delightful guest to have on Talking Pints. Fantastic career, and I tell you what, you're part of a very elite batch of people. To have been in that Queen's last honours list is a very, very special thing.
Yeah.
And in your case, thoroughly deserved.
I'm very pleased. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
OK, we have got a couple of minutes left on the programme. It's time for Barrage the Farage. Let's see what you've got for me. Robert asks, Suella Braverman looks like she means business regarding the migrant boats. Do you think she can put a stop to them? Do you know what? I honestly, very often, you see a political leader that says something, and you think, well, they're saying it for effect. They're saying it because they think that's what the audience want to hear. But do they actually mean it? I think Suella Braverman really does mean it. And one of her most powerful arguments is there are people who legally come in to the country as immigrants, and these days, that's an expensive, process. It takes time. It costs money. You know, why the hell should these young men jump the queue coming over the channel? So I don't doubt her sincerity in this for one little bit. What I doubt is whether our relationship with the European Court of Human Rights, and indeed the Human Rights Act, which has taken that European Convention into UK law with our judges, I just worry that legally she may not succeed. But is she sincere? No question in my mind. Ryan asks, Brexit is unfinished. The Conservatives are anything but conservative. Immigration's out of control. Is another political earthquake brewing? Ryan, the last political earthquake that took place in England and Wales, I led, and it was 10 years ago, and there were huge gaps. You know, Tory, Labour had become much the same. There were huge gaps. The difficulty is to have a political earthquake under a first-past-the-post electoral system is blooming difficult. But yes, I have to say, I honestly believe that beautiful building behind me, for those of you watching on telly, that magnificent Palace of Westminster, I think the people inside there are more detached from ordinary folk than they've almost ever been. Richard asks, is America really concerned about TikTok or simply jealous of its success? It isn't just America. The European Commission, even the BBC are now saying to people, if you have TikTok on your phone, the Chinese Communist Party can look at you. Hey, so many questions I can't answer. I've done my best, I hope, to answer a few. Enough from me. Let's have a look at the all-important weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell and here is your latest forecast on the Metaverse. Well, as we go through the next few days, it is set to remain unsettled. All of us will see some further spells of rain and it often will be quite windy. So here's the situation as we end Tuesday. Huge area of low pressure really dominating the Atlantic. This area of low pressure just towards the west of Ireland will then bring in another spell of wet and windy weather across a lot of the country as we go through the course of the night. So you can see this area of rain gradually working its way eastwards as we go into small hours of Wednesday morning. Turning quite heavy, especially across parts of Cumbria and into Scotland, and accompanied by quite a strong wind. We have got a yellow wind warning in force for Scotland as we go into Wednesday morning. So expect a little bit of disruption here, but note the temperatures, a mild night to come across the country. The rain may well take its time to clear the very far southeast as we go through Wednesday, but for a lot of Wales and into the Midlands, actually a bright start to the day, but further showers working their way in across England and Wales as we go into the afternoon. And really for Scotland and Northern Ireland, a really blustery day here with a mixture of sunshine and showers. Quite large waves as well across western areas, so just do take note of that if you are living near the coast. Into Wednesday evening, really much of the muchness really. Further spells of rain working their way in across the country. Again, turning quite heavy at times. May well wake up a few people as we go into the small hours of Thursday morning. But with the strength of the wind and the cloud and the rain, again, a fairly mild night to come. Could stay in double figures across the far south of the UK. And into Thursday, another band of rain then works its way in across the country. But in between, we will see some spells of sunshine. And where we do see the sunshine, it will still be feeling fairly mild, with temperatures reaching the mid-teens across southern parts of the UK. Then into Friday and Saturday, it's really the same weather really for a lot of the country. But as we end Saturday, it does set to turn colder across the north.